I was patrolling the national park and was about to head back to base when a small lion cub suddenly darted out onto the road right in front of me. Taken by surprise, I slammed the brakes so hard that the Jeep skidded sideways across the red dust, stopping just a few feet from the tiny creature. The cub simply stood there in the middle of the road, meowing pitifully, staring straight into my eyes with such despair that it was immediately clear something was drastically wrong. I got out of the Jeep and tried to shoo the cub away with my arms, but he jumped up to my feet, stood on his hind legs, braced his front paws on my knees, and howled so invitingly that my heart sank. The cub looked at me with his huge amber eyes, then turned sharply and ran into the tall grass, constantly glancing back to make sure I was following. I grabbed a backpack with water and rope and followed the cub through the acacia thicket under the scorching sun. We trudged for about 2 minutes until the cub stopped near a spreading tree and ran to a depression in the ground, peering down and howling pitifully. I walked closer and froze. It was a poacher's pitfall trap, deeper than a man's height, with steep earthen walls, and at the bottom lay a lioness. She was barely moving, only her sides heaving slightly from her heavy, exhausted breathing. The lioness tried to raise her head and growled weakly, but her eyes were clouded with dehydration, her tongue dry, and her fur covered in dust. She had clearly spent more than 1 day there. I grabbed the radio and called for backup, then tied a rope around an acacia tree and descended into the pit. As I approached the lioness with water, I noticed movement in the corner. A sand viper, one of the most venomous snakes in Africa, was slowly approaching the exhausted lioness. The lioness didn't even notice the threat. I grabbed my hunting knife and lunged forward, striking with all my might right behind the snake's head, pinning its writhing body to the ground. After killing the viper, I turned back to the lioness and began pouring water onto her tongue. She drank greedily, her eyes briefly clearing with relief. I stroked her head and whispered, "Hold on, girl, help is on the way."
Just then, I heard a sound from above that made me freeze in horror. The high, shrill roar of the lion cub, filled with fear. I jerked my head up and saw the cub roaring with all his might, trying to scare someone away. Then I heard a terrible laugh. Hyenas. The pack had caught the scent of the dying lioness, and all that stood in their way was a tiny, defenseless cub. I grabbed the rope and climbed as fast as I could, my palms burning from the friction. When I reached the top, 6 hyenas had formed a tight circle around the pit, and between them stood the tiny lion cub, its paws spread, its fur bristling, uttering the most ferocious roar it could muster. The alpha male hyena took a few steps forward, and the cub rushed at the predator 10 times its size. I dashed to the Jeep, grabbed a flare gun and shotgun, and raced back. I fired a flare over their heads. The pack flinched, but didn't retreat far. The cub ran up to me and pressed himself against my leg, boldly continuing to growl. The hyenas split up, planning to attack from different directions. I fired warning shots and flares, keeping them at bay, but they understood it was just light and sound. The cub suddenly lunged at the alpha male who had crept to the pit's edge, clinging to the hyena's muzzle and scratching with his tiny claws. I fired into the ground below the hyena's paws, sending dirt into its face. I scooped up the trembling cub and held him to my chest. I had 1 rocket and 1 bullet left against 6 hungry predators closing in.
Just when the alpha male crouched for the final attack and I raised my rifle, I heard the most beautiful sound, the roar of powerful engines approaching at a high speed. 2 pickup trucks appeared from behind the undergrowth, raising clouds of red dust. The rescue team had finally arrived. The trucks raced straight toward us, honking desperately, and the hyenas finally retreated into the undergrowth. My knees trembled with relief as 4 people jumped out. Kwasi and Abena from veterinary services, plus Kwame and Ajoa from the rescue team with a winch and stretcher. The team moved quickly. Abena fired a tranquilizer dart at the lioness, and while we waited for it to take effect, Kwame and Ajoa set up the tripod and winch above the pit. Kwame and I descended with the net stretcher, carefully positioned it under the sleeping lioness's body, and secured all corners with carabiners. The winch hummed as the stretcher slowly rose, and 3 minutes later, the lioness safely reached the surface where the veterinary team was waiting. We transferred her to the back of the pickup truck, where Kwasi inserted an IV catheter and Abena applied cooling compresses. The cub didn't move from the back, standing on his hind legs trying to see his mother.
She'll survive,
Kwasi
Kofi.
finished
You
the
found her in
examination
time.
and said, "She'll survive, Kofi. You found her in time." I climbed into the cab with the cub on my lap, and we drove an hour to the rehabilitation center. The lioness was transferred to a ward on IVs for full examination, while the cub was placed in an adjoining room where he could see his mother through the glass. At first, he scratched at the glass, but gradually calmed down and fell asleep on a warm blanket. I visited them every week. The lioness regained her strength day by day, and the cub grew by leaps and bounds, turning into a strong young lion. 2 months later, they were ready for release into the protected area of the reserve. Early one morning, we arrived at the release site, an open patch of golden grass at the foot of the hills with spreading trees and a stream. I opened the cage and pulled the bolt. The lioness emerged first, stepped onto the soft grass and paused, enjoying her freedom. She stretched her entire body and let out a soft roar of pure joy. The cub followed and immediately began scurrying in circles, chasing butterflies in a frenzy of happiness. The lioness turned to face me, approached, and lightly pressed her forehead to my chest, an ancient gesture of respect. I stroked her mane and whispered, "Live long and take care of the cub." The cub ran up to me, standing on his hind legs just like when he first stopped my car. I scratched him behind the ears one last time and said, "You're the bravest cub." He licked my hand and ran after his mother toward the hills. I watched them go across the open grass under the bright sun, then between the acacia trees, gradually dissolving into the golden haze of the savanna. The cub glanced back a few times, and then they both disappeared over the crest of the hill, becoming once again part of the wilderness they had almost lost forever.